You will be terminated. Yeah, admittedly, that's a strange title. Roman Terminators, like what? But that's what I think of when looking at this and handling it. Dark, industrial, apocalyptic, near indestructible, lethal, heavier than you'd expect.
You weigh 400 pounds?
All right, so this is the Legionnaire from Zombie Tools. Disclaimer, it was sent to me for free to review. As usual, I try to be as unbiased as possible, but I'm only human. So let's take a closer look. The handle scales are made of T6 aluminum wrapped in leather. The blade is made of 5160 spring steel, always a good choice. Heat treated to a hardness of 55 HRC. I also appreciate when makers are being transparent with their specs. And the entire blade is etched in ferric chloride acid to give it this worn, apocalyptic look. The hilt is also aged and distressed. All these marks here are not damaged from tests, but it comes like this to make it look already used and worn. The nice thing about this finish, as I've pointed out before, is that it makes actual age and use and rust and all that blend in a little bit more. And in fact, I did have quite significant rust. Usually I oil blades after use, but I must have forgotten it with this one. And particularly on this side, there was a pretty large spot here. I tried to first very gently remove it. Quick tip, if you use WD-40, spray it on there and wipe it. That takes care of a lot of surface rust. But this was a little more severe. Then I tried to gently rub it with metal polishing paste, which does make the rust go away, but it also makes the finish itself fade. So you do still have to make sure to keep it oiled or use Renaissance wax for long-term storage, things like that. So you can get rust on there. And if you do and don't notice it or wait too long, then it might be difficult to get it off. But again, it blends in pretty well, especially on this side. If I hadn't told you, you probably wouldn't even notice that this is not part of the finish. As usual with Zombie Tools, you can expect high quality work when it comes to fit and finish. The fit is literally as tight as you can possibly make it. There's no gap at all anywhere. The finish is of course irregular because it's etched, but it's done professionally and everything is perfectly even. You know, the blade overall is completely straight. This type of overlapping leather wrap I'm generally not a fan of, both in terms of aesthetics and handling, but it suits this kind of style well, and it's perfectly comfortable. It's also quite secure, so I can't really complain about that. And it's extremely tight. Again, professionally done. They know what they're doing. All right, so handling. This sword weighs about 1.1 kilograms, which doesn't sound like much, and it's really not. Like, you can swing it around just fine with proper speed and everything. However, a gladius of this length would be more around 2/3 of that weight. And the way it's balanced is a little bit odd because due to the chunky aluminum handle scales, I used to think it's steel, but it's actually aluminum, but they still have a certain amount of weight compared to wood or plastic or whatever. And so it's balanced really close to the handle, which you do want for this type of sword. If you want to go mainly for thrusts and cuts more secondarily, that's fine. There's nothing really wrong with the balance as such. It could be further out, but it feels odd. You know, compared to other swords I've handled of similar length, there's a lot of dead weight in the hilt. Yes, with the balance, you can move this pretty easily, but there's still something about it that just kind of weighs you down, for lack of a better term. Now, you can easily argue comparing this to historical swords is kind of irrelevant, misses the point, because this is, well, not supposed to be a historical sword. It's a post-apocalyptic fantasy sword. So it's not really a problem as such. And of course you get something for the additional weight, which is strength and durability, which matters, of course. Now, this is not something that you need to save your life, hopefully, anytime soon. I mean, you never know, right? Maybe in 2030 we get a zombie apocalypse. You never know, but generally this is a collector's piece. You're not really expected to use it a whole lot unless you like backyard cutting. And of course you could also use it as a machete of sorts to clear underbrush, things of that nature. Like it has some tool application. And of course, it being this thick means that, yeah, it's going to be really hard to damage. Interestingly, I was told that they originally prototyped a thinner blade, which was 0.204 inches, if I remember correctly. Well, this here is a 1/4 inch, and they thought it felt too light. So different frame of reference. If you don't compare to historical swords and aren't, you know, a HEMA guy, whatever, you may have a very different opinion of this and a different impression. It's really just in comparison to historical designs. And they also said that if people want, they can actually request a thinner version of this, which is going to be lighter and somewhat differently balanced. That's what I would personally go for. But again, if you want something that's nigh indestructible, short of doing really unreasonable things, then this is the way to go. And speaking of doing unreasonable things...
This is stupid crap just to prove a point. Please don't do that, all right? Oh. Yikes. That's horrible. I wouldn't do that with anything else. This is horrible. But still straight and undamaged.
So ups and downs, pros and cons. As usual, that applies to historical weapons as well. The thicker you make something, the more resilient it's going to be, the less likely it is to bend or break. The more you can go crazy with it without having to worry about it, but the heavier it's going to be, and the more it will be at a disadvantage against a lighter weapon of similar type or even a different type, which, you know, in this case, lore-wise, if you will, doesn't matter because zombies don't fence. Anyway, onto the cutting performance. I was having some trouble here. The cut is clean, it just didn't go all the way. There are swords that make it easy and are very forgiving. Like even if your edge alignment isn't perfect, they'll still cut and all that. This is not like that at all. If your edge alignment isn't good, you're not going to get a clean cut. And even if your edge alignment is good, you have to put quite a lot of power into it. Which of course makes the edge alignment suffer. The harder you swing, the less control you have over it. And I did that quite a bit in order to get all the way through the mat. I put a lot of power into it and it wasn't very clean as a result. And that's mainly due to the grind here. So it tapers from the edge of the fuller here to not quite the edge, but rather to a secondary bevel, which is pretty steep. So, you know, it's a thick blade, it's a fairly steep secondary bevel, a hard one too, so you have fairly hard shoulders as opposed to a gradual transition. That all contributes to resistance in the cut. It works, you just have to give it more oomph, which, you know, for a bladesmith is not a problem, in all fairness. The good thing is it doesn't flex or vibrate excessively. In fact, it doesn't flex at all, basically, because of how rigid it is, which is good for thrusts. Unsurprisingly, thrusting is what it does well. I didn't have a particularly realistic test medium at hand, so I just went out to stab some dead trees, which were rotted enough to be relatively soft, at least in parts. And yeah, it went well. As you can see here, no complaints. And again, the durability just shines. You don't have to worry about anything here. No matter what you try to chop or stab or what have you, it's going to be unscathed. And that's of course very appropriate for a post-apocalyptically themed weapon. You want it to be as close to indestructible as possible because, well, you can't just replace it easily or repair it. So it's very true to its concept, let's put it that way. It also comes with a Kydex sheath, which of course is also good in terms of, you know, almost indestructible and, you know, easy to clean and, you know, resistant to the elements, and it fits it well. Not too tightly, so if you tilt it down, it's not going to fall out. But if you shake, it will, so you can draw it quickly and easily. So that's just about what you want. So not too much to be said about it. It works. You know, it looks appropriate for the style. And I think the handle scales could be like G10, for example, would be quite appropriate, I think, in terms of look. I mean, it wouldn't look quite as nice or cool as this aged aluminum here. I will say that. but it would save some weight and would change the balance a little bit. Might be worth experimenting with, but that's up to them. All right, so what about the value for money? It's not cheap. 576 US dollars puts it solidly in the mid-range, maybe even high mid-range in terms of price. Well, I probably shouldn't even say that. Admittedly, I'm still struggling to adjust to the crazy inflation and the current prices. It's still not entirely in my head when it comes to a lot of things. Everything is stupidly expensive now. And of course, these are handmade in the US. You can't compare that to the price of something made in China or India or what have you. So I think it's reasonable for what it is and how well it's made. Compared to other options on the market, it's a bit on the pricey side. So it depends on your frame of reference. But if this is particularly the style that you like, there's really no alternative. At least I haven't seen anything that looks quite like this. There are other tactical sword designs on the market, but they don't look quite like this. And from what I've seen, are not made quite as well. If you like the style and appreciate just how much of a tank it is, then absolutely I can recommend it. When it comes to home defense, it's also a pretty good choice in some ways because you might want a shorter blade for confined spaces. Personally, I think for home defense, you would definitely want the lighter version because any extra weight just is a potential disadvantage. Like it'll weigh you down. And yeah, I'm not going to talk too much about the ins and outs of swords for home defense because there's a lot to be said about that. And you can easily argue that a sword is not a great self-defense tool or home defense tool in light of other options. But, depending on where you are, it might be a great option. Anyway, before I get too rambly, I'll wrap this up. So Zombie Tools, Legionnaire, good stuff. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review and take care, folks.